If you had asked me 3 years ago to describe my life, I would have smiled before the question was even finished. Not a posed smile, not the one I put on for Christmas cards, the real one. The kind that comes out when you genuinely believe your life looks exactly the way it is supposed to. I was 34, living in a pale yellow house on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, with a man I had spent 7 years building a life with 5 of them as his wife. His name was Daniel. He was the kind of man who knew I took my coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar, who would text me something completely pointless at noon just because he thought of me, who once slow danced with me in our kitchen on a Tuesday night in November because a Stevie Wonder song came on the radio, and he just reached over and took my hand. I remember the linoleum was cold under my socks. I remember thinking, quietly, that I was lucky. I need you to hold onto that image for a moment, because everything that comes after only lands the way it should if you first understand what I believed I had. And then there was Renee, my sister, 2 years younger, which meant she had always been there, somewhere in the frame of every memory I have from childhood. We grew up sharing a bedroom in our parents' house in Westerville, a small city just northeast of Columbus. 2 twin beds pushed against opposite walls, a shared dresser with a broken bottom drawer we never got around to fixing. We shared everything: secrets, clothes, problems, opinions about people we were not supposed to have opinions about. When I got married, Renee was my maid of honor. She cried so hard during the ceremony that my aunt passed her a travel pack of tissues from her purse, and Renee used every single one. I have a photo from that day, both of us in the parking lot of the venue before the ceremony, her arms around me, both of us laughing at something I cannot even reconstruct anymore. For 5 years, that photo sat on my bedroom dresser. I cannot look at it now. I have not moved it, but I do not look at it. Our family was the loud, warm, impossible to leave kind. My parents still lived in Westerville, in the same house Renee and I grew up in. Sunday dinners, there were a standing event, not a formal invitation, just something that happened every week because it always had. My mom would start cooking by early afternoon, and the smell of it hit you the moment you walked through the side door. My dad would be in the living room with the television too loud. Cousins, aunts, an uncle who showed up when he felt like it. The table was rarely the same configuration twice. Our family group chat had over 30 people in it and was never quiet. Daniel fit into all of it like he had always belonged there. He and Renee had a natural, easy dynamic. She found his dry humor hilarious. He appreciated that she never took herself too seriously. I used to love watching them at the dinner table, trading jokes while I helped my mom in the kitchen. I thought their ease with each other was something I had given them both. I thought it meant my life had been built correctly, that the people I loved most could exist in the same room and feel like one complete thing. I had a career I had put real years into, a house with a yard we actually maintained, a dog named Birch, a scruffy terrier mix we adopted 2 years into the marriage, friends I had kept since my 20s, savings, a 5-year plan. Looking back, I was not naive. I had been through hard things. I lost a pregnancy in 2019, and I had navigated real grief and come back from it. I knew life was not guaranteed to stay easy, but I had looked at everything around me and made a deliberate, conscious choice to trust it, to trust the people who made it up. That is the part I still turn over in my mind, even now. Not that I was fooled, people get fooled, that happens. The part that stays with me is that I trusted people who had, at some point before I ever noticed anything, decided that what they wanted mattered more than what I deserved. They had already made their choice. I just had not been told yet. The first thing I noticed was the phone, and I noticed it the way you notice something small that you cannot immediately explain. With a passing thought you file away and do not revisit until later. It was a Thursday evening in late April. Daniel and I were on the couch after dinner, watching something I cannot even remember now, and his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He reached over and picked it up before I even registered the sound, turned the screen toward himself, and set it face down against his leg. I told myself it was a work thing. He had been dealing with some project, something he described vaguely whenever I asked, and then redirected the conversation away from. I did not push. I thought I was being respectful of his stress, but then it kept happening. The phone was always face down, on the kitchen counter in the morning, on his nightstand when we talked before sleep, on the bathroom ledge while he brushed his teeth, which struck me as odd even at the time. Who brings their phone to the bathroom to brush their teeth unless they are waiting on something? He started going to bed later than me, which was new. I had always been the early sleeper and he had always been the same, but that spring he started staying up in the living room after I went to bed, saying he was not tired yet. Once, around 2 in the morning, I woke up disoriented and reached across the bed and he was not there. I found him sitting in the dark living room, the blue light of his phone screen on his face. He said he could not sleep. He came to bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before I drifted off again. I asked him once gently over dinner one evening whether everything was okay, not accusatory, genuinely asking. He put his fork down, looked at me and said he was fine, just tired, just stressed with work. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said, "I'm okay, I promise." I believed him. I went back to eating. Around the same time, Renee started becoming harder to reach. I want to stop here because I know that sounds like a small thing, and I need you to understand why it was not. Renee and I did not just text occasionally. We communicated almost every single day, voice notes while she drove, a meme she sent because it reminded her of me, a 10-minute call on her lunch break about something that was not even worth summarizing. That was just the rhythm of us, 30 years of it. So when the voice notes stopped, when my texts sat on read for 3 or 4 hours when she would normally reply within 10 minutes, when she canceled our standing Thursday evening call 2 weeks in a row with reasons that were perfectly plausible and somehow still felt slightly off, I noticed. I could not have explained exactly why it felt wrong. It just did. I mentioned it to Daniel one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. I said something like, "I feel like Renee has been pulling back lately. I'm not sure what's going on with her." He was loading the dishwasher, his back to me. He shrugged and said she was probably just busy, that I was overthinking it. He did not turn around when he said it. There was one Sunday dinner in early May that I keep returning to. The usual crowd, my parents, my Aunt Patricia, 2 cousins, Daniel, Renee, and me. Someone told a joke at the table, the whole table laughed, and I turned instinctively toward Daniel the way you turn toward someone you love when something is funny, that reflex of wanting to share the moment. But he was not looking at me. He was looking at Renee. And by the time my eyes reached her, she had already looked away and was staring down at her plate, her fork resting still in her hand. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. Nobody else noticed. I probably could not have explained in that moment why it made me feel like something cold had moved through my chest. I drove home that night and told myself I was tired. I told myself I was projecting, that watching Daniel be distant had made me hypervigilant about everything around me. I told myself that the thought quietly forming at the edge of my mind was not something I needed to look at directly, because looking at it would make it real, and I was not ready for it to be real. But the thought was already there. It had been there for weeks. I just had not admitted it to myself yet. I was not trying to catch anyone. I want to be specific about that because it matters. I was not the kind of wife who checked location history or went through phones or hired anyone. That simply was not where my mind had fully gone yet. I was still in the part where you rationalize, where you tell yourself that you trust your husband and you trust your sister, and the story taking shape in your head is probably just anxiety wearing the costume of intuition. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late May, a warm day. Daniel had taken a half day and had been home since early afternoon. He was in the shower, and his laptop was open on the kitchen table, not unusual. He left it there all the time. I walked past it to grab my keys from the hook by the door. I was not looking at the screen. I was thinking about whether I needed to stop for gas. And then a notification appeared in the corner of the screen and I saw the name before I even meant to. Renee. I stopped walking. My keys were in my hand. I read the message preview once and then again because my brain did not process it correctly the first time. It was short. But it was the kind of short message that carries an entire world inside it. The kind that uses a private nickname, not the one our family used for her but a different one, a softer one that could only have been created between two people alone together. The kind that references something they had done recently, casually, as if it were simply a fact of their shared life. The kind of message that has a particular warmth in its phrasing that you only use when you are writing to someone you love and you think no one else is reading. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me later. Then I walked out the front door, got into my car in the driveway, and did not start the engine. I just sat there and breathed. In and out, slow and deliberate, the way you breathe when you are trying to keep the edges of things from dissolving. It was warm enough that the car was stuffy, but I did not open the window. I sat there for 40 minutes. When I went back inside, Daniel was on the couch. The laptop was closed. He asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, I had just forgotten something. I made dinner. I asked about his day. At some point he mentioned Renee's name in passing, something routine about a plan we had made weeks earlier, and I watched his face while he said it. He looked completely normal. He passed me the salt. That evening I made a quiet decision, not out loud, not written down anywhere, just settled in my chest. I was not going to react. Not yet. I was going to find out how far this went first, and I was going to do it carefully. Over the next 2 weeks I paid attention differently. Not frantically, carefully. Things I had filed away separately began to connect. The evenings Daniel said he had worked late mapped almost exactly onto the evenings Renee had told me she was tied up or not feeling well. A receipt I found in the inside pocket of his jacket while preparing it for the dry cleaner. I always checked the pockets, out of habit, from a small Italian restaurant in the short north called Verona Kitchen, dated a Friday in March. I remembered that Friday. Daniel had told me he had a team dinner downtown. I had stayed home alone with Birch and watched a movie because the house felt too quiet. And then there was Clara, a mutual friend Renee and I had known for years, familiar enough to feel like furniture. But sometime in May, Clara became strange around me in a way that was hard to name and impossible to ignore. Too warm, too deliberate. She laughed slightly too quickly at things I said, touched my arm with slightly too much care, and never quite held eye contact for more than a second. It was the way someone behaves when they are managing guilt that does not entirely belong to them. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I dialed before I had fully decided to. When she picked up, I skipped the small talk. I told her, as steadily as I could, that I felt something was happening around me that I was not being told about, and I needed to know if she knew anything. The silence that followed was long enough that I pulled the phone away to check if the call had dropped. Then she said, very quietly, I didn't want to be in the middle of this. That was all I needed. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, 8 months. It had been going on for at least 8 months. 8 months of Sunday dinners at my parents' house. 8 months of group chats that never went quiet. 8 months of Renee hugging me at the door, sitting at my kitchen table, telling me she loved me, and meaning it I had thought completely. 8 months of Daniel sleeping beside me, kissing me good morning, knowing exactly how I took my coffee. 8 months of a life that had been entirely real to me and apparently a backdrop to be managed around by both of them. I did not cry that night. I sat at the kitchen table after Daniel went to bed, the corner lamp on, Birch settled by my feet. I put both hands flat on the table and I sat with it, the full, unfiltered weight of it. And underneath the devastation, which was real, and I am not going to dress it up as something cleaner, there was something else beginning to take shape. Something quiet, cold, and focused. I chose a Saturday morning for the confrontation, and not for dramatic reasons. The practical reason was simple. Daniel and I were both home, and Renee was already planning to come over that morning for what she thought was just a casual visit, coffee, conversation, whatever we usually did. I had not engineered the invitation. It had been on the calendar for 2 weeks, but when I woke up that Saturday and thought about what was going to happen, it felt right. I needed them both in the same room at the same time. No gap between conversations where they could compare notes, calibrate their stories, or decide together how to frame it. Renee arrived at 10:15. She came through the side door the way she always did, knocked twice, and walked in, wearing a light blue jacket I recognized from the previous winter. She was smiling. She put her arms around me at the door and I let her. I hugged her back and felt the full, terrible weight of knowing what she did not know I knew. I made coffee. I set 3 mugs on the kitchen table. I sat down across from both of them, placed my phone in the center of the table screen side up, and said quietly, without raising my voice, that I knew what was going on between them. The kitchen went completely silent, not the comfortable silence of a familiar room, a different kind, the kind with texture. Daniel spoke first. He started with denial, the way people do when they have not yet assessed how much you actually know. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then he looked at my face, recalibrated, and shifted into the language of complexity. He said things between us had not been right for a while. He said it was not something he had planned. He said he had not meant for it to happen, as if that phrase has ever once in the history of human relationships made anything better for the person hearing it. Renee was quieter at first. She sat with her hands in her lap, looking at the table. Then she looked up at me and said something I will not forget for the rest of my life. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't help what I felt." I have replayed that sentence many times since. Not from pain, more because I am genuinely still struck by how a person arrives at a place where they believe that is an honest thing to say. The feeling is presented as the agent, as if the feeling made the choices. As if it was the feeling and not 8 months of daily decisions to deceive that built the lie around me while I was standing inside it. Feelings do not make those choices. People do. I asked them both to leave my house. No shouting, no crying. I held the door open until they did. I called my mother that afternoon from the back porch, sitting on the step with Birch pressed against my leg. I told her everything methodically, calmly, the full timeline. I expected her to be horrified. I expected her to say something like, "I cannot believe Renee would do this to you." I expected her in that moment to be my mother. What she said, after a long pause, was that these things were complicated. She said Renee was still her daughter too. She said she hoped we could find a way through this without the family falling apart. And then she actually asked me, whether I thought there was any way I had played a role in problems in my marriage. I looked at the yard Daniel and I had spent an entire October weekend clearing and reseeding 2 years earlier, and I ended the call. Not dramatically. I just said I had to go and press the button. My father called back an hour later, gentler in tone, but the message underneath was the same. Keep things together. Think about the bigger picture. Don't let this tear the family apart. Don't, as though I were the one holding the match. Over the next several days, the calls and messages from other family members arrived one by one, and each one told me exactly where that person stood. My aunt suggested couples counseling, for me and Daniel specifically, which told me she had already framed this as a marriage problem rather than a betrayal. A cousin texted to say Renee was really struggling, and that maybe, when I was ready, I should give her a chance to explain. One person, only one, a cousin on my father's side I had always liked but was not especially close to, sent a single message that said, "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this." I read it 4 times. It is still in my phone. I stopped responding to the others. Not as a declaration, I simply had no energy left for conversations where I had to justify the fact that I had been hurt. I went quiet in a way that probably looked from the outside like I was collapsing under the weight of everything. I was not collapsing. I was deciding. Here is something true about the morning after a confrontation like that, something I do not think anyone who has not lived it fully understands. It is not cinematic. It is not dramatic. It is just very still and very heavy. I woke up that Sunday with Birch at the foot of the bed and the house completely quiet, and I lay there looking at the ceiling, and I understood fully, without any remaining uncertainty, that the life I had been living was over. Not wounded, not in need of repair. Over. That particular version of my life no longer existed, and no amount of conversation, time, or effort was going to rebuild it into what it had been, because what it had been was not real. I got up. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and thought very clearly about what I was going to do next. Within 72 hours, I had made an appointment with a divorce attorney. I found her myself, searched independently, and chose someone completely outside my social circle. No shared connections, no overlap. Her office was downtown on High Street, in a glass-fronted building with a waiting room that had gray chairs and a water dispenser in the corner that made a low bubbling sound every few minutes. I sat in one of those chairs on a Monday morning in a blazer I had worn to work presentations, and I felt completely calm in a way I had not expected. When I sat across from her, I told her everything, not the emotional version, the factual one. Dates, amounts, account names, what was in my name, what was in his, what we had built together, and exactly how. She took notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I could not read from across the desk. At the end of the meeting, she set her pen down and said I was in a considerably stronger position than I probably realized. Here is what Daniel had never tracked carefully enough. I was not a passive financial participant in our marriage. My freelance work had grown into something substantial over the years. I had investment accounts in my name that he was aware of in a general sense, but had never followed closely. I had contributed to our shared financial life in ways that were documented, traceable, and clear. A paper trail that painted a precise picture of a woman who had been an active, significant partner in building everything we had together. He simply had not been paying close enough attention to know what that picture looked like. I went home that evening and let Daniel believe I was still processing. He tried to talk to me twice that first week, once to apologize in the way people apologize when they are more sorry about consequences than actions, and once to suggest we consider counseling before making any permanent decisions. I listened both times. I kept my face neutral and said I needed space to think. I watched him interpret that exactly the way he wanted to. Every evening that week, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table under the corner lamp with my attorney's notes in front of me. Birch settled at my feet, which helped more than I expected. I organized documents into folders, printed records, and labeled them, cross-referenced dates and amounts with my own files. I was not fueled by anger in those hours. I was focused in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, like a part of me that had always been available had finally found its reason to activate. Renee texted twice. The first message was 3 careful paragraphs, the kind of apology constructed to sound complete while quietly protecting the person writing it. She used the phrase, "I hope you can understand," twice. The second message came 3 days later and simply said she wanted to talk, that she missed me, that she needed me to know how sorry she was. I read both messages in full. I did not reply to either. My mother left a voicemail. I listened to the whole thing, something about time, family, and taking care of myself. I deleted it after one listen, not out of cruelty. I had already heard everything she was going to say. From the outside, I imagine I looked like a woman who had shut down, someone who had retreated into silence because she did not know what else to do. I understand why it looked that way. Silence looks the same from the outside regardless of what is driving it. But there is a kind of silence that is chosen, deliberate, and purposeful. It does not look like anything in particular, and that is precisely why it works. While everyone around me was quietly calculating what I might do next, waiting to see how long before I softened or reached out or began the work of keeping the peace, I was already several steps ahead of all of them. The paperwork was filed on a Thursday. Daniel found out the following Monday. I was not there when he found out. I did not need to be. His attorney contacted mine. That was how Daniel learned that what I had been doing in the quiet was not falling apart, it was building a case. The version of events he had apparently been counting on, the one where I eventually exhausted myself and returned to the table from a place of emotional depletion, willing to accept whatever was offered, did not exist. It had never existed, not from the moment I sat in that waiting room with gray chairs and told a woman with a yellow legal pad exactly what I had and exactly what I intended to do with it. What followed was a process, weeks of back and forth between attorneys, documents submitted and reviewed and challenged, numbers proposed and countered. It was not easy and it was not fast, and there were days when it was genuinely exhausting in a physical way, like carrying something heavy for a long distance. But I did not waver on the things that mattered. I did not accept the first settlement number or the second. I had documentation and I had patience, and I had nothing left to lose by waiting for a resolution that reflected reality. Daniel's real miscalculation was not the affair. That was a moral failure, and a serious one. His strategic failure was assuming that because he was the more visibly successful earner, he was the one who held leverage. The financial picture of our marriage, laid out in full, told a different story. My contributions, my accounts, my business income, my records, all of it organized and presented clearly. The settlement we ultimately reached reflected a true accounting of what I had put into that life. It reflected, in real numbers and binding terms, the fact that I had been a full and active participant in building everything we shared, even when the people around me had been treating me as if I were simply scenery. The family watched from a distance as the reality of everything settled in. These things are difficult to contain in a family the size of ours, and I was not trying to contain it. Word moved the way it always does. And I watched from a careful, deliberate distance, as the people who had urged me to keep the peace began to go a little quieter, not because they had suddenly found clarity about what was right, more because the peace they had been trying to protect had revealed itself to be an illusion, and protecting an illusion has real costs that eventually come due. My mother called again, about 6 weeks after the filing. The tone was different, softer in a way that felt more like recalculation than genuine change. She asked how I was really doing. She said she wanted me to know she loved me. I was polite. I did not give her much. My father sent a text saying he was proud of how I was handling things. I read that one twice and thought about the conversation on the back porch, the one where I had been asked whether I had contributed to problems in my marriage. I responded to his text the following week, briefly, because he is my father and permanent estrangement is not a position I hold as a default. But I responded from a different place than I ever had before, a place with a solid floor under it. Then Renee reached out again. Not a text this time. A handwritten letter mailed to the house in a standard white envelope, her return address printed in the top left corner. I recognized her handwriting immediately. She has always had very round letters, the kind that look like they belong to someone younger. I picked the envelope up from the floor where it had fallen through the mail slot, held it for a moment, and set it on the kitchen counter while I sorted through the rest of the mail. I looked at it for a while. Then I put it in the recycling bin, unopened. I pressed it down beneath a cereal box so it was covered. I want to be honest about why, because I think it matters. It was not rage. I was past the hot stage of that by then. It was not a performance for anyone because no one was watching. It was something simpler and more permanent. There was nothing in that letter I needed. Not an explanation, I already understood what had happened. Not an apology, nothing she could have written would have changed what I now knew to be true about her. Not a request to try again, because no version of trying again existed. And not even the kind of closure people speak about as though it is something another person hands you, because I had already given that to myself. The door was already closed. You do not need confirmation that a room is empty to know there is nothing left in it. The consequences continue to arrive in their quiet, methodical way, not all at once, one by one. I did not celebrate any of it. I did not share updates or retell the story to everyone who asked. I simply allowed it to proceed, the way water runs downhill, not because you pushed it, but because that is what it does. There is something nobody really prepares you for on the other side of a betrayal like this. Everybody talks about healing and closure and moving on, and those things are real. I am not dismissing them. Time does something. Distance does something. But underneath all of it, there is a different kind of change that does not have a soft name. It is not warmth. It is not peace exactly. It is clarity, the hard, permanent kind. Not the clarity that comes from therapy or time or a good conversation with someone who loves you, though all of those things have their place. I mean the specific, irreversible clarity that comes from watching people you trusted be faced with a genuine choice. Be honest or be comfortable. Stand for something or stand down, and learning, without any remaining ambiguity, what they chose. You cannot unknow that. And honestly, you would not want to. because knowing it is what allows you to stop organizing your life around people who were never fully in it with you. I live alone now, in a one-bedroom apartment in the short north, smaller than the house, quieter, and mine in a way the house never quite was. Birch came with me. I have a coffee maker I chose myself and a bookshelf I assembled on a Saturday afternoon with the windows open and music playing. Every person with a key to my front door has earned it. Every relationship I maintain is one I have examined clearly and chosen deliberately. The circle is smaller than it was. It is also real in a way it was not before. My mother and I still talk. It is a different kind of conversation now, more honest, more grounded, built on a new understanding that I will not be managed, I will not be placated, and there are certain things I do not negotiate on. That understanding has never been stated outright, but it exists beneath every exchange we have, and I think on some level she knows it is there. Some other family members I have simply let go, not with announcements or dramatic exits, but by no longer making space for them, which after enough time amounts to the same thing. Renee and Daniel are still together. I know this the way you know things when you share a city and have mutual acquaintances, not because I look, but because information moves. When I hear it, which is occasionally and briefly, what I feel is something that tends to surprise people when I describe it. Not sadness. Not anger. Not even the particular vindictive satisfaction that others seem to expect and perhaps want from me. Indifference. Genuine, settled, unperformative indifference. If you have never reached that place with someone who once had real power over your life, let me try to explain what it means. It means they are finished. Not defeated in some dramatic sense, not suffering in a way I am monitoring, just finished. They do not have access to my peace anymore. They cannot hurt me or reach me because there is no longer any point of contact between who they are and what I care about. Whatever they are doing, wherever they are in this city, it simply has nothing to do with me. That is what I was building toward, even when I did not know I was building toward anything. Not the settlement, though that was fair and I do not minimize it. Not the silence, though that was necessary and I would make the same choice again. What I was building was a version of myself that does not require any of them, not their acknowledgement, not their apology, not a revised version of history in which they finally admit what they did and how wrong it was. I already know what happened. I know what I lost, and I know exactly what I built from what was left. I know who I am now, who is in my life, and why. I took everything. Not only the settlement, not only the legal wins, not only the house and the accounts that had my name on them all along. I took back the part of myself that had been quietly handed over across 7 years of trusting people who were not trustworthy. That is the part they never anticipated. That is the part they cannot touch. It was always mine. I just had to go through all of that to remember it.